Welcome, my friends. Today I will share with you a story of love lost and found, a family's journey through hardship to healing. Enjoy the story. 9-year-old Emily Johnson sat on the worn plaid couch in the cramped living room of the tiny house she shared with her mother Sarah, on the outskirts of Williston, North Dakota. Faded yellow curtains blocked the late afternoon sun that threatened to bake the little room. "Mama, how come you never talk about my daddy?" Emily asked, her wide blue eyes studying Sarah intently. Sarah froze, nearly dropping the plate she was drying. Even after all these years, the pain still felt so raw. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Well, honey, your daddy, he fell in love with another woman when I was pregnant with you. And he left us. But why? Didn't he love you? Didn't he want me?" Emily looked at her with such innocence that it shattered Sarah's heart all over again. "Of course he wanted you, baby. Loving you had nothing to do with why he left. Your daddy he made some bad choices." Sarah set the plate down and came over to Emily, smoothing her daughter's unruly chestnut curls. Emily's brow furrowed as she processed this information. Even at her young age, she understood her family was different from those of her classmates. They all had daddies who came to school events and coached Little League. She didn't even have a daddy to put on the Father's Day card she made in art class last week. Well, if her own daddy didn't want the job, she'd just have to find a new one. Emily squared her little shoulders resolutely. She hated seeming weak or girlish, which is why she never wore dresses and only played with the boys at recess. She would find a way to replace her missing father figure, no matter what it took. Sarah collapsed into bed later that night, exhausted to her very core. Being a single mother was draining enough, but dredging up the painful memories of her failed marriage today had sapped her last reserves. She could still vividly remember the day she first met David's mother, Margaret. Sarah had been so nervous, wanting so badly to make a good impression on her new mother-in-law. But the disdain in Margaret's eyes as she looked Sarah up and down made it clear she had already been judged and found lacking. "Trash!" Margaret spat out as she picked disdainfully at Sarah's Walmart blouse. "You're just temporary trash David's slumming with." Sarah had been stunned speechless at Margaret's open hostility. Over the years, she tried her best to win over the imperious older woman, but nothing was ever good enough. Not the home-cooked meals, not the spotless house Sarah kept, and certainly not Sarah herself. When David had his terrible accident at the factory and needed an expensive operation they couldn't afford, Margaret had descended like a vulture. "I'll give you the chance," she told Sarah. "But only if you sell that little house your granny left you. Consider it payment for me fixing the mess you've made of my son's life." Sarah had reluctantly agreed, believing Margaret's smooth lies about only wanting to help them. She signed over the only thing of value she had, her pride and joy, the cozy cottage she had inherited from her beloved grandma and had dreamed of raising her own family in someday. David came home from the hospital a changed man, cold and cruel. He sneered at Sarah's swollen belly and accused her of cheating on him while he recovered. "Who's the father, he growled as he threw his plate of spaghetti against the wall. "Which of your trashy little boyfriends is my baby's daddy? Or do you even know?" "David, please, nobody else. It's only ever been you, I swear it," Sarah sobbed. "Liar," he'd bellowed. "I found your secret stash of tight dresses and heels, you two-timing whore." Only later did Sarah discover Margaret had planted those clothes in their closet to enrage David and convince him of Sarah's imagined infidelity. In the end, David stormed out, filing for divorce, and Margaret watched in triumph as everything fell apart, just as she'd intended. Sarah wiped away hot tears as the painful memories washed over her. She couldn't change the past. All she could do now was focus on giving Emily the best life possible, even if it meant doing it alone. 3 months later, Sarah sat in the darkened living room feeding newborn Emily. She still couldn't quite believe she was a mother. Aunt Linda let her move into the little apartment over her garage when Sarah showed up 8 months pregnant with no money and no place to go. It wasn't much, but it kept a roof over their heads. Sarah had to give up her dream of being a literature teacher, forced to take a job as a milkmaid on Linda's farm instead, so she could afford diapers and formula. The work was hard, and Linda was a tight-fisted taskmaster, begrudging Sarah every penny, but they had food in their bellies and a safe place to sleep. Sarah knew it could be worse. She gazed adoringly at Emily, so innocent and tiny. "It's you and me against the world, baby girl, and I promise I will do whatever I have to give you a good life." "Give it back, trailer trash!" The taunt rang out across the schoolyard. 9-year-old Emily whirled around to see Jack Carter, the biggest bully in 5th grade, waving her beloved copy of The Secret Garden over his head. His 2 nasty friends guffawed beside him. Emily saw red. How dare they? She launched herself at the knot of boys, a whirl of flying fists and kicking feet. The yard monitor's whistle shrieked. Later, sitting outside the principal's office sporting a split lip, Emily waited for her mother. She knew she'd catch hell for fighting, but what choice did she have? She couldn't let those jerks walk all over her. "Emily Louise Johnson!" Sarah appeared, disappointment etched on her tired face. "What have I told you about fighting?" "They started it!" Emily protested. "They stole my book! I want my daddy!" The words spilled out before she could stop them, and Emily stared at the floor, ashamed of this babyish outburst. Sarah sighed and crouched down, tipping Emily's chin up to meet her eyes. "I know it's hard, honey, but your daddy's not here. It's just us." Sarah wrapped Emily in a hug, her own heart aching for the pain her little girl carried. "I will always protect you, Emily," Sarah vowed fiercely. "No matter what, I will keep you safe." If only Sarah knew how soon that promise would be tested. Emily hunched her shoulders as she trudged down the sidewalk. Her shoes pinched her toes, the tattered soles wearing through. The too small dress from the church donation bin rode up her skinny thighs. Suddenly, a hard shove from behind sent her sprawling. Jack and his cronies, the bane of her existence. Well, if it isn't little Emily Johnson," Jack drawled, leering at her. "Where do you think you're going, trailer trash?" "Leave me alone, Jack," Emily spat, scrambling to her feet. "I don't want any trouble." "Too bad, because trouble's what you're gonna get." Jack stepped in closer, cracking his knuckles menacingly. "See, me and the boys are bored, and we figured a little runt like you would be fun to rough up." His friends guffawed sycophantically, tightening the circle around her. Emily's heart raced with fear. She knew all too well what these bullies were capable of. "My big brother Pete taught me a few new fighting moves," Jack informed her with a nasty grin. "I've been looking for a punching bag to practice on." Emily didn't wait for him to make good on his threat. She kicked him hard in the shin and took off like a shot, their outraged bellows chasing her heels. Tears of rage and terror pricked her eyes as she ran blindly. No idea where she was going, only knowing she had to get away. She couldn't let them catch her, hurt her. But what was she going to do? Emily knew she had to find somewhere to hide. She couldn't outrun them forever, and if they caught her, they'd make her pay dearly for that kick. There had to be somewhere she could go, someplace they'd never look. The train. Emily had a wild idea. She could hop one of the freight trains that rolled endlessly through town, escape to someplace far away where Jack and his goons could never find her. She crept along the tracks, heart pounding, until she spotted an open boxcar. With a furtive glance around, she heaved herself up over the high edge, tumbling into a dark, musty interior. Emily curled into a ball behind some crates, praying the train would start moving before she was discovered. But luck was not on her side. "Hey, what are you doing in there?" An outraged shout. The conductor, shining a flashlight in her face, red and sweating with anger. "Kid, this ain't no free ride. You gotta have a ticket." Emily cowered under his wrath, stammering out an apology. "I'm sorry, mister. I didn't mean no harm. I just gotta get away from these boys chasing me." The thundering of feet outside the car made her blood freeze. "No, it couldn't be." But Jack's voice rang out, vicious with triumph. "She's in here. The little bitch went in the train." Emily scrabbled backwards desperately as Jack and his friends clambered into the car, cutting off her escape. The conductor gaped at the sudden chaos, clearly out of his depth. "Thought you got away, huh, freak?" Jack panted, fists clenched in anticipation. "Well, you can't run now, and we're going to teach you a lesson you won't ever forget." Emily backed away until she hit the cold steel wall of the train car, trapped. Her hand closed around the hard lump in her pocket, the pocket knife she had stolen from Aunt Linda's farm. She didn't want to use it, But she would if she had to. Jack and his buddies fanned out, slowly advancing with sadistic grins stretching their faces. Nowhere to run now, runt. You're gonna get the beating of your life. The conductor wrung his hands, clearly wanting to intervene but unsure how to handle a bunch of enraged preteen boys. Now let's everyone calm down, he tried nervously. I'm sure we can talk this out. Shut it, Grandpa, Jack snarled. This is between us and her. He turned back to Emily, a merciless glint in his piggy little eyes. I'm gonna enjoy this. Emily braced herself, the pocket knife slipping into her sweaty palm. This was it. She'd have to fight with everything she had. That's enough! A deep voice cracked like a whip. Step away from the girl. Now! A tall, imposing figure blocked the light from the open train door. A cop. Emily almost collapsed with relief. Jack paled and scrambled back. We weren't doing nothing, sir, honest. Just messing around. Can it, kid? The cop grabbed Jack by his collar and heaved him easily out of the car. He cuffed the sputtering boy to the ladder rung. Don't move a muscle, he warned Jack's stunned friends. Backup's on the way and you're all under arrest for assaulting a minor. He turned to Emily, his expression softening. It's okay now, honey. You're safe. I'm Officer David Keller. Can you tell me your name? Emily Johnson, she managed to whisper through the lump in her throat. The cop studied her intently, a strange emotion flickering across his rugged face. After a long moment, he held out a large, gentle hand. Well, Miss Emily, you've had quite an ordeal. Let's get you home to your folks. I promise, those delinquents won't lay a hand on you again. Sarah paced the small platform, sick with worry. Emily should have been home from school hours ago. Horrible scenarios raced through her mind. Emily injured, lost, kidnapped. The wail of a siren reached her ears. Sarah whirled around and her knees almost buckled. A squad car rolled to a stop and the back door opened. Emily scrambled out, crying, Mama! Emily! Sarah crushed her daughter close, tears of relief soaking the little girl's hair. My baby, what happened? Are you all right? She's had a difficult afternoon, but she's safe now, a painfully familiar baritone answered. I made sure of that. Sarah's eyes snapped up, and the breath left her lungs as if she'd been sucker-punched. It couldn't be, but there he was, the man she'd tried so hard to forget. David? Hello, Sarah. His deep rumble sent shivers down her spine, like it always had. His ice-blue eyes flicked to Emily, then back to her in dawning comprehension. She's mine, isn't she? Sarah swallowed hard and nodded mutely. David made a choked sound, his eyes closing briefly in regret. I'm so sorry, he said hoarsely. God, if I had known. I've been searching for you for years, ever since Mom told me the truth. Sarah sat rigidly beside David on the threadbare plaid couch, a chasm of hurt and betrayal yawning between them. Emily happily perched on David's lap, too young to understand the painful history. In the past few hours, he had become her white knight, the daddy she always yearned for. When you left, Mom was gleeful, David explained, self-recrimination roughening his voice. But her story about you cheating never quite added up. I kept finding little things that were off. Receipts for those trashy clothes in your size that I knew you'd never wear. A bogus bank statement Mom waved in my face as proof. He met Sarah's gaze squarely, his own eyes luminous with regret. When I confronted her, she blurted out the truth. How she framed you, orchestrated everything to drive us apart. Because no one could ever be good enough for her precious boy. Sarah pressed her lips together hard, determined not to cry. It was the vindication she had hoped for so long, but it didn't change the years of struggle and heartache his abandonment had put them through. I've been scouring the country for you ever since, David continued urgently. I hired PIs, followed up on every possible lead, but you had vanished, until today when this brave girl led me right to you. He cuddled Emily tenderly. I want us to heal, Sarah, he said softly, to be the family we were always meant to be. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, pressing it into her hand. This is the money for your grandma's house and then some. I'm sorry you had to sell it. Consider this a down payment on our future together. We can buy it back, or any house you want. Start fresh. Sarah stared at the check, the zeros blurring as hot tears spilled down her cheeks against her will. Could she do this? Risk her bruised, wary heart again? Allow this man back into their lives, into Emily's life. She looked at her little daughter, so valiant and strong, yet so starved for a father's affection and protection. Maybe David deserved a second chance. Maybe they all did. Emily bustled around the cramped kitchen, setting out their best chipped china and fussing with a wilted bunch of wildflowers. Her daddy was staying for dinner. Her young heart felt full to bursting. She still couldn't believe he had saved her, like a prince in the storybooks, and now he would be part of their lives again. She had missed so much. Father-daughter dances, his strong arms swinging her high, his deep voice reading bedtime stories, but they had forever now to make up for lost time. "My Emily," David murmured, pulling her into a tight hug. "My brave, beautiful girl." She let herself sink into his embrace, treasuring the rare feeling of complete safety. As he prepared to leave, David turned to Sarah. An unspoken question hung in the air between them. "One day at a time," Sarah said quietly. "We have a lot to work through. But I want to try." Hope and tenderness cracked through David's steady composure. He reached for her hand. "I meant what I said, Sarah. You and Emily will never want for anything again. I will spend my life making things right, being the man you both deserve. My family will never face hardship alone, not while I have breath in my body." He held her gaze, letting the vow settle into her bones. With a soft kiss to her knuckles, he slipped out the front door and into the velvet night. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, the evening breeze cooling her flushed cheeks. The future was uncertain and more than a little frightening. A cop's wife was never an easy thing to be, but for the first time in a long time, her heart felt light. She had her little girl. She had her integrity and grit, and maybe, just maybe, she had her husband back too. A family, hers, not perfect or conventional, but real. Together they could weather any storm. As long as they had each other, anything was possible, even second chances, even happily ever after. Golden autumn sunlight dappled the park, the distant shrieks of children's laughter ringing out beneath the canopy of changing leaves. In the middle of the grass, a small family picnicked on a red-checkered blanket, a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Emily squealed from the tire swing David was pushing. Her dark curls flew behind her as she soared up to the blue sky, her little face radiant with unbridled joy. David complied with a grin, putting his back into it. "You've got an adrenaline junkie here, Sarah. Might have to buy her a parachute for her birthday." Sarah smiled, contentment filling up all the hollow places in her soul as she watched her husband and daughter play. The past few months hadn't been easy. There had been hard conversations, painful revelations, old wounds reopened and finally cleansed. But through it all, they had clung to each other. David had been true to his word, moving heaven and earth to keep his family safe and cared for. And slowly, tentatively, Sarah had learned to trust him again, to let herself love him again. "Okay, my intrepid explorer, I need a break." David collapsed dramatically on the blanket, pulling Emily down into his lap and tickling her until she giggled breathlessly. "Daddy, stop!" she gasped between peals of laughter, and he relented, hugging her tight instead. "Never," he smiled into her hair. "I'll never stop loving you, Emmy Bear. Not ever." Sarah met his eyes over their daughter's head, her own shining with unshed tears. She had spent countless nights praying for a moment like this, for the three of them to be together, a family, and now it was here, her wildest, most desperate dream come true. David reached for Sarah's hand, tugging her to nestle against his other side. He wrapped his arms around both of his girls, cocooning them in his strength and love. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," he murmured. "That I get to have you both, after everything. I won't ever take it for granted. You two are my whole world." Sarah laid her head on his broad shoulder, listening to Emily's sweet giggles and David's resonant heartbeat under her ear. Maybe there was no such thing as a perfect family. Maybe every couple had their struggles, their broken places, But in that golden moment, Sarah felt certain that every tear, every lonely night, every sacrifice had been worth it, because it had led her here, to her own little piece of paradise, a devoted husband, a delighted child, a family pieced back together with forgiveness and hope and unconditional love. It was messy and hard-won and a little bit miraculous, and it was hers. Snuggling deeper into David's side, Sarah thought her heart might just burst with sheer happiness. The three of them had been to hell and back, but they had made it, together, and she knew that whatever life threw at them next, they would face it the same way. As a team, forever.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, what's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. "Why is he so angry?" Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike. What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.